welcome to the Theology Pugcast. It's great to have you here. And a couple of the normal guys are here. I'm here, Tom's here, and we'll introduce ourselves. Unfortunately, Glenn is still wrapped up with a family matter related to a very close family member's health. We won't talk about that. That's something for him to share. And regardless, we're going to do the best we can. And we have a guest today that we've been looking forward to having on. We'll let him introduce himself in a minute. But anyway, I'm C.R. Wiley. I'm a pastor. I serve a church in the Pacific Northwest. I've written some books. Been a real estate investor, professor of philosophy. Anyway, that's enough about me. Tom.
I'm Tom Price. I teach systematic theology, Christian ethics, philosophy, apologetics, and a host of other things. One of the places is Gordon Conwell Theological Seminary.
Well, our guest today is someone that is going to talk about a center in Connecticut that is going to be a real, I think, blessing to the people who live in the immediate environs there. And may actually come as something of a surprise to people who maybe have some notions about what life in Connecticut is like and what's possible there and what isn't. Anyway, Labin, why don't you introduce yourself?
Sure.
And give us a little bit on your background and then talk to us a little bit about the Blake Center.
Absolutely. Well, my name is Labin Duke, and I work for Hillsdale College at the Blake Center for Faith and Freedom in beautiful Somers, Connecticut. And it is beautiful, though this time of year it does get cold, actually. So there is that. And then, as you mentioned, it is in Connecticut, which is in New England, perhaps a nation within a nation, as I've come to discover over the past year.
Right. Yeah. Well, you're in kind of Jonathan Edwards' old stomping grounds there, not too far from where he ministered, but. Tell us a little bit about the Blake. Well, before we do that, why don't we give us a little bit of background on yourself? So this isn't the only thing you've ever done in your life.
Sure.
What else have you done, and where'd you come from?
Well, so I've had a couple of I guess you could say higher education stints. Did some work at Dallas Theological Seminary, helping establish some of their free online courses. So. The initial course we launched was the free online course on the Gospel of John, and if you go to DTS's classes today, you'll find a number of courses that I helped put together there. And of course, they've taken it and run with it. Now they have almost 500,000 people involved in those courses to this day. So that was a sort of a fun keystone project that I got to work on there, and was happy to get to do that. I also did some work at Baylor University, worked in their donor relations department. So I've had sort of a dual role of working in theology, but also working in development in higher ed institutions. So my job at Baylor was in their donor relations department as the director of donor relations. Served in that role for a couple of tough years, honestly. That was during the time when Baylor was really facing a lot of backlash nationally over their handling of a sexual abuse scandal. So it was not a particularly easy time to be in donor relations, to put it mildly.
Right.
I've also worked at Nashotah House Theological Seminary, so kind of got back on the seminary track on that front, and then now working for Hillsdale College. So that's the work background in brief.
Nice. Well, sounds like you spent some time in Texas.
And
transitioning from Texas to Connecticut can be a culture shock.
Yeah, I got used to the temperature change when I went to Wisconsin. Wisconsin has cold weather too.
That would do it, yeah.
But then, I guess you could say a different kind of climate adjustment coming over to Connecticut.
Right. Yeah. Well, that's great. Well, tell us a little more about the Blake Center and what is going on there. I know a little bit about the arrival of Hillsdale in Connecticut because in Somers there was initially kind of this sort of response, kind of in fear that, hey, we're going to have a college in our nice Tony little community, and there's going to be a lot of traffic, and there's going to be a lot of disruption, and it's as I noted, a kind of a Tony section of Connecticut, not nearly as Tony as say Greenwich down, or Fairfield County, but it's a pretty nice area. So tell us a little bit about the center, its architecture. I know it's a pretty cool place.
Yeah. So the center comes as the product of a gift from Presley and Helen Blake. So Presley Blake is one of the co-founders of the Friendly ice cream chain that's in New England. So if you're familiar with the area, you'll know the Friendly's name as being sort of a long-running name. And of course, over the years, the restaurant's been sold a couple of times, and you could perhaps say that it wasn't what it once was, but it was established as a really solid chain, more in the vein of like an In-N-Out, a really small menu, dedicated, high quality, but a sit-down restaurant. So it provided a low-cost place for people to have a family dinner, but actually sit down to a meal that was delivered relatively quickly. So they'd kind of carved out a good niche there. Presley Blake, obviously, very successful businessman. But then the story of how Hillsdale and the Blakes kind of get together is an interesting one. One of the sort of oddities is that, the Blakes' granddaughter applied to Hillsdale College, to be a student. And then our admissions department did not send her a letter of acceptance. So,
Hillsdale's pretty exclusive.
these admissions folks, you have to, you got to wonder sometimes, and you go, could you just take another look? She happens to be the heiress, of a $1 billion family. Could we just, maybe give it another look?
Well, maybe you could make that part of your recruiting efforts. We are so dedicated to high standards. We turn away the children of millionaires.
It's a funny thing. I think that was the impression that the family left with. Oddly enough, I think the family left going, look at the principled stance that they took there. They knew who we were. They knew where we stood, and still, just get in.
They didn't sell out.
I'm not giving advice here to other small colleges on how to handle their admissions. This is not how you do it. But no, I think that happened, and it actually wound up leaving a really good taste in the family's mouth. More broadly, that they were like, here's a place that really stands by, its admission standards. And that's something that is perhaps not as common as one would want these days. So I think that part of it left a good taste in the mouth. But then also Helen Blake took one of Hillsdale's free online courses, of which there are now, there's now an entire library of these courses. She took the one on Aristotle, so she got to study Aristotle with Larry Arnn, our president, who is featured in that course. And of course, she had studied Aristotle in her grade school education back in the day when they did such things in K through 12.
That's right.
And she just really enjoyed it and felt like that she had become, a part of something, and realized that Hillsdale stood for that. And then as the course of time goes, it became time for them to kind of think through their estate. You'll appreciate the timing here. So Presley was, 104 before, really, a lot of plans for the estate kind of started to heat up here.
I'm not going to die.
I mean, if you ask the guy, great. What's the secret to long life? And he'd be like, good ice cream. So, I'm not telling you how to do it, but there's right. Advice from a guy. So, around the age of 104, he starts thinking, we really ought to make some plans for our estate. So they owned 100 acres, or I guess at the time it was about, 80 acres or so that they owned in Connecticut. And of course, for his 100th birthday party, one of our buildings that we have now, to kind of back up a little bit. So, he's fixing to turn 100. He builds a replica of Monticello. Because, if you're going to celebrate your 100th birthday party and you got the money to do it, I mean, why not? Go big. So, so we have what I like to say is the best replica of Monticello in the world. Because it's the only replica of Monticello in the world. So, of course, we get the best. But it's this fantastic near 1-for-1 exterior replica. The bricks are sourced from Virginia clay pits. The architecture is spot on. The only real noticeable difference is the 3-car garage, which, let's say Jefferson never quite got around to that. But inside is completely different, very, very modern facility. But built that for his 100th birthday party. promptly sold it and never lived in it, but sold it right away. And then, we get to the place where they're starting to think about their potential, impact, and their legacy in a philanthropic scenario. And, a couple ideas were dancing around, a couple of other, admittedly, we had some other colleges in the running. But, again, this memory of the admission standards and also the national influence through those free online courses, kind of led portions of the family, specifically the daughter, Susan, led her to kind of urge her mom to, consider Hillsdale. And of course, Helen's thinking, what would Hillsdale in Michigan, care about this property in Connecticut? But she sends a letter to Larry Arnn and goes, would love to have you out show the place. So, a lot of the Hillsdale muckety mucks, if you will, Larry Arnn in particular, comes out, has a look at the property, and are genuinely charmed. Here's this beautiful 70 acres of pastoral land. It's got several homes on it, several outbuildings. If you're from the area, it's kind of like its own little mini Sturbridge village of sorts. Tom's been out here and seen it. There's some cute little buildings that are period specific. It's really kind of a fantastic property. But at the time, like I said, Presley didn't own Monticello. He had sold it. So, but he couldn't resist. And when they came out, he took Larry Arnn on a tour of the building that he was so proud to have built. And of course, as the legend and story goes, is Larry Arnn's looking at it, goes, I love this other property, but boy, do I like that Monticello building. So, if I understand it right, within 24 hours, Presley had given the college enough money to buy it back and add not only that building and the land, and had done all the necessary intentions to not only gift the property, but give a proper endowment to ensure the perpetual operations of the facility. And of course, so then the zoning battle starts, which is sort of a fun tale of, once somebody hears that there's going to be, keggers on the front lawn, it's hard to get that image out of their head. I still face that one to this day, where I'm like, we just haven't gotten around to the kegger. Maybe I'll put it on the schedule at some point. But no, we have no intention of being bad neighbors.
We could do a keg and theology night.
Well, you see, a lot of the folks who are like in that community, they did that. That was what their experience of college was, and so they just projected it on you guys.
Yeah. Oh, they were. It was everything from our traffic's going to be ruined to the lighting's going to be ruined. And I think obviously one of the things that keeps coming back up is the loss of tax revenue, and all of these different concerns sort of boiled up and were part of the zoning concern. And of course, it's all public record. Hillsdale had to bring in its legal team to emphasize to the town, listen, we're establishing a center here that is focused on faith and freedom, but faith comes first, and faith is primary to the center's operations. Hillsdale's been a Christian college from its start, and it is ever more leaning into that founding and heritage.
You guys built a pretty significant chapel up in Michigan. Who was it? Duncan Stroik was your architect, which is like the man, and like on a global level when it comes to sacred architecture these days. So you guys secured the property, which is great. You've got a stake there in north central Connecticut, which is like I said, a really cool area. By the way, it's also tobacco country. So if you're like into cigars, it's a great place.
When we have you out sometime, we'll have to smoke some out on the terrace outside only. We'll have to hook you up.
I'll be up for that. Now, tell us a little bit about the programming there. I think that's another really wonderful thing to see. So it's faith and freedom. And
that's right.
As we were talking before the show, sometimes one gets emphasized at the expense of the other when you see that kind of thing happen. But it sounds like the goal here is not to lose one or the other.
Yeah,
so
we're trying to a little bit about that. We're trying to strike this God and country balance. And honestly, it came to me at a good time. I was in Wisconsin. It's a purple state, and we'd have to get too into politics, but hey, you're talking to a Hillsdale guy. It's gonna come up. You just can't avoid it.
Right. Right.
I wasn't completely satisfied with the way I saw some of the elections go, and I thought to myself, here I am at a seminary doing good work here, but I'm not sure that I'm actually contributing to the future of this country. Would that there was a way that I could serve both God and country. Certainly putting God first, not in a Christian nationalist negative sense where somehow my country becomes my God. Being mindful of that potential pitfall, but certainly thinking that the blessings of liberty in this country are perhaps unique in the course of human history, and at least deserve a little bit of effort on the part of good Christian people to see about trying to maintain that. Certainly, the people who landed here, far into our history, thought it a rather good thing that religious liberty should be a part of the fabric of our country. And I think it behooves the people who have inherited that to give it a little effort to try to maintain it. So
Right.
when this job came open at Hillsdale, it seemed to me a direct answer to, if it wasn't a prayer, certainly a burning thought on my part that there ought to be a way to do that. So our programming reflects that kind of God and country focus, that faith and freedom kind of focus. So we've got a number of programs coming up this year. So this year's probably, we've been testing out a couple different formats and a couple different speakers, trying to find that right mix over the last year. So that's certainly not the first time that we've got our programs out the door. We've had, at least a dozen prominent programs since I've been here. So I've been here a little over a year. We've already had a dozen programs, but this year I would consider the first time when we're kind of coming out of the gate, in sort of all cylinders firing, if you will. So we've got a number of seminars coming up. So we're going to cover things, more directly, like, looking at specifically the phrase separation of church and state, and Jefferson's original framing of that in his letters, but then also the way that phrase has been used and perhaps misused throughout the years to mean things that it didn't mean, but also, the importance of religious liberty and how the founders intended the government to interact on that front. And I won't give too many spoilers, but...
Yeah, which is an interesting thing to consider in Connecticut because it's the Constitution state.
That's right.
And it had an established church.
Right.
I mean, so it wasn't as though there weren't established churches in the colonies. There were.
I guess you could say, "My, how the mighty have fallen." Right. And then we've got things that are a little bit more direct in terms of their focus on Christian theology. So we'll be having Gerald McDermott and one of our own professors, Don Westblade, will be discussing Israel and Christian theology. So obviously, Dr. McDermott has written extensively on that subject, so we look forward to having him and picking his brain. And admittedly, as a DTS grad, I look forward to bringing back some of the good old days at DTS to punch him around a little bit. You can't let these theologians get off too easy, But we're looking forward to having him.
We try to keep Tom off his balance there. We try to.
Oh no, not the Israel discussion.
You always know when he's gone too far when he's tossing the word ontological in places you're like, I'm not sure that word belongs there, but I'm trying to figure that out.
You find out later it does.
It's your catch-all. It's your catch-all, Tom. I just fancy that we could toss ontological into anything and make it theological. We'll also be looking at the prayer book. So we have our own chaplain who's an Anglican priest, and we're wanting to bring him in. Let's talk about the prayer book and its contribution. I mean, you look at the marriage rite still pulls very heavily from the 1662 prayer book. And so much of our thoughts about, even on a very secular church stage, anytime you watch a movie that is in any way trying to give a nod to a Christian wedding, it uses the prayer book liturgical, wording. And so that influence, I think, is paramount, even in a country that admittedly was not too fond of the Church of England, all things considered. I'm pretty sure Jonathan Edwards may be rolling over in his grave in the cemetery to have that happen. But we're going to do things like that. But also, we're going to look at things that are perhaps related to faith, but maybe not seem right on the right on the surface. So we're going to have a problem that an event that looks at the problem of fake news. We've all been faced and all been, watching a media that seems to be slanted or prejudiced in some ways. But at the same time, even the conservative, quote unquote, conservative media leaves much to be desired, in terms of, give me the true story here. What is really going on with this particular news story?
Right.
So we're going to be, having our journalism professor, our endowed chair of journalism, John Miller, he's going to come out and talk through how he trains, his journalism students to be able to read the news for actually getting, critical thinking skills for reading the news, if you will. So, and I think that is important to a Christian church to be able to understand what is really going on, not only to inform our prayer life, but also to inform us as citizens who potentially are going to vote.
Yeah, that's great that you're having Miller out. I mean, I've been kind of following him a little bit over the years, and I've got a number of people that I've known over the years who teach Hillsdale, like Brad Beerzer. If you ever have Brad out, I'd love to know and come and hang out with him a little bit. But
you, Brad, cigars,
so
it's all coming together now.
Yeah.
Right.
Well, that topic itself, though, is very significant. We've covered a few times on the show just the kind of propaganda and the way in which, especially the media, has increasingly become obviously, basically a huge outlet on all sides for propaganda. And so the capacity for students to actually learn to read and be able to digest material and see through material, I think is timely. That's a very important course, I think.
Now, Labin, you mentioned that you had some experience getting online courses available or accessible to people. Will there be anything at the Blake Center that's accessible for people in other parts of the country?
So part of my experience. So there's a good news, bad news to online courses, and I sort of stumbled into this in the midst of being really excited about my own sort of project work at DTS. We built these courses, and the initial thought was, Gospel of John. Wouldn't it be great if, in the course of a year, we managed to get 10,000 people engaged in this course? And I sort of set that up as like, boy, I want to hit that 10,000 mark. As I know it's sort of an internal, it's one of just those goalposts for me, but I'd love to be able to say that we've been able to have 10,000 people in there. That was roughly at the time that was getting close to the number of live alumni at DTS. So it was like, that's a fun working number to say, like, we've got just as many people who have taken our course in the Gospel of John as we have alumni. What happened was we released this course, and released it at a terrible time of year. I mean, we released it right after Thanksgiving, right before December. It is a well-known sort of industry standard of like, you don't do cool new things at that time of year because people are distracted. But we did it anyways, and then sort of the rocket took off. The first sort of alarm bell was, when we got I got a call from the network hosting company that we had hired to handle the traffic load on the website. Get sort of an immediate note from them that they're thinking maybe we're getting a denial of service attack. And I was like, oh, great. The last thing we need, we first launched this thing and then the hackers are coming for us, Turns out that was not the case. And in fact, we just had not purchased the right tier because we weren't ready for the flood. So roughly 13 days after launch, we had 10,000 people taking the Gospel of John.
Wow.
So far outstripped any expectations we had. Within just a month, we had, almost 100,000 people in that course. Within 6 months, we had 250,000 people taking that course. So it was hugely successful. And the way I'd pitched it was, let's replace some portions of our paper acquisition with a different way of raising money that drives value to the donor on the front end, a lot of value, and then just gives them opportunities. So I wanted to decrease the number of envelopes I was shipping with the big, bold red letters and all of the little claptrap of, how to do direct mail. I was wanting to lean away from that and lean into a different way of doing fundraising, and it worked very good in that format. The downside, and so here's the devil part of it. The downside is the percentages of people who are actually finishing this thing are fractions of a percent. Now, fortunately,
Wow.
Hillsdale actually boasts a number which still just sort of rocks my world. I think it's close to 30% of people that engage with a Hillsdale course show some measurable, and of course, the actual facts and figures on the back end, you have some shifting, but fit some scenario that is significant engagement with a course. Whether that means they're taking some number of quizzes or they're engaging with a certain number of videos, but they're engaging seriously with the course. If I was to be honest, the numbers that I was seeing, when I built my own courses for DTS on that front, fractions of a percent. So out of 100,000 people, I could really only find 1,000 people, give or take, that had had watched more than 2 or 3 videos. And then of those 1,000, I could only find about 100 people that I could confidently say had passed a certain number of quizzes to meet a B level, grade in the course.
Yeah.
So that's the devil of the MOOC style course, is you get this broad engagement, which is it's sort of a fun numbers game. But then it also yields a kind of student who's not used to having to go through courses they wouldn't want to take. And so at some level, I do think it has yielded a challenging situation for DTS, where I think the students coming in, I think this is the case that their billable hours is no longer represented in their student population. Like, they have enough students now that their billable hours, their credit hours that they're selling to students, that number should be higher than it is. And it's because students aren't necessarily coming to be degree seeking anymore. They're coming to piecemeal. I want to take the course on Romans, and then I want to take the course on Intro to Theology. But you know what? I'm not really interested in Old Testament theology, and I'm certainly not interested in Hebrew. And you know what? I'm actually good on Greek too. And I'll pass on the homiletics. I'm never really going to preach this stuff. Just give me the stuff that I want.
Well, with regard to what you can do though at the location for the Blake Center, what's your capacity like? So when you have something that's on site, how many people can you host?
Well, so right now we're limited by our largest room. So our engagements are about 75 people, and to kind of stitch this back to what I was saying before. So we've got some seminar events that are going to be about 2 days in length, and we can have 75 people for those. But then I've got a number of other smaller engagements, just single evening engagements that are intended to take what was a fully online experience. So like Constitution 101, a fully online experience. You take the quizzes online, you study with the professor online. But my experience at DTS taught me that there's got to be some way to draw those people into a physical place, and a specific time, so they can be physically present with one another. That's something that I think the pandemic taught us, is that we need to be together in a particular place at a particular time. Of course, here we are, digitally together on a podcast, but I don't think there's any question that it would be better, if we were together on our terrace having cigars. I don't think anybody questions that being the case.
Right.
But, we'll be having some dinners on like Constitution 101 and inviting students, locally in this region of the country who took that course to come and meet their professor. So we're going to have R.J. Prestrito come and offer a talk, that takes that next step in the coursework, that natural next progression to the coursework, but then also gives students a chance to not only meet their prof, but also meet fellow students who've been in this course together and have that shared experience. It's sort of a capstone moment to having engaged with us online. So I'm hoping that this year, doing several courses like that, we'll be doing Theology 101 like that. We'll be doing the Real American Founding like that. C.S. Lewis on Christianity. We're actually going to have, Hope Against Hope here. We're working on having Michael Ward come over from England.
Oh, nice.
So to have a proper C.S. Lewis scholar who's over at Oxford, right?
Yeah. So once that gets lined up, obviously that'll be on your website, right? I mean, is your website sort of like a site of Hillsdale, or is it a separate site?
Sure. Right now, that's blakecenter.hillsdale.edu. They gave me a proper leg underneath the bigger umbrella.
So it is a sublink. So if you go to the Hillsdale site, you'll be able to find it, but you could go there directly.
Yeah, probably the best way to get there is just direct blakecenter.hillsdale.edu. Probably the best way to get there. And then yes, our events will be updated there with information on how you can register or contact us in order to express some interest in one of our programs, and hopefully get you out here and let you drink deeply from the well.
Yeah, that's great. Well, I think it'd be great. Occasionally Glenn and I get back to the area, and Tom, of course, is right there. But it'd be great for us all to kind of come down there and hang out with you a little bit. It'd be a lot of
maybe
fun.
we can even do a session of the Pugcast.
Oh, that'd be great. Yeah, that'd be cool. Yeah,
Pug
I'm
not
up for
included.
that.
Pugcast minus the
pug. That's right. You've got to have some standards, environmental standards. You just can't have a bunch of pugs running around.
So I noticed on your Patreon page, I really appreciated the Barrett 50 cal in the high class category. Hillsdale's into shooting sports, so I found my mouse drawn to that side of the page because the Barrett 50 cal was really touching a nerve.
So now, in terms of the kind of the long-term plan for the Blake Center, is there are these courses, so forth. How is the relationship kind of established with Hillsdale? Is there like an official extension kind of connection? Yeah. Can people take coursework that would actually
full length, right?
Be part of the? Yeah, is that going to be the case?
It's not a piece of it right now, but I'm following a mold that's similar to what was done at the Kirby Center. So Hillsdale has an extension site in Washington, D.C. It's the D.C. campus, but it started out as the Kirby Center, and they hosted events much like we're doing here. Over time, built interest, built a base of support, and then they fundraised for and established the Van Andel Graduate School in Politics, which, those students both take courses on the main campus and at the DC campus, but then their internships and things like that are largely run directly out of that location. I think that's a good mold, and it's one that is a sustainable growth mold. I think that it took them a better part of the decade to kind of make that transition from being, center focused and event focused to really having a graduate school focus. Obviously, I'd be lying if I wasn't at least interested in the thought of having a Hillsdale Masters of Divinity. I think there's a place for that in the marketplace.
Oh yeah,
well, especially in this area, we found that, and even just seeing the hunger in a lot of churches for advanced education is significant.
Yep. Yeah, particularly there in Central Connecticut. You had the Hartford Seminary for a while, which is it's just on fumes. But it's kind of freaky liberal. It's at that stage where they're so far left. They're trying to distinguish themselves from a bunch of other leftist institutions by even being weirder. So it'd be great to have something solid there that had a broad sort of evangelical, and orthodox orientation that I think would be helpful.
Mission alignment. I have intentionally not established a separate mission statement for the Blake Center because I don't see the need to do so. When you look at Hillsdale's own mission statement, it already, in my mind, covers the bases of what we're trying to do here. And, there's just no need to reinvent the wheel. That's not to say that we don't highlight the aspects that are represented directly in our name. It's certainly the case that, we're zoned as a religious institution. The Blake Center is zoned that way, and that's not an accident, and that's not convenient as perhaps some in the media have portrayed it. It's an integral part of the focus for this center. But I guess to put it another way, my interview with Larry Arnn, which I guess I could get in a little bit of trouble for saying this, but hey, you need good content for the Pugcast, so I'm going to give it to you right here. So my interview with Hillsdale was it was a very intense process. I was, I knew a couple people at the institution, but didn't necessarily have the backdoor good old boy system in place. I kind of had to come through the front door and apply properly without really having a lot of connections. And so Hillsdale, doing their due diligence, really wanted to make sure that I was the right person. And I think I have the number right, that it was about 26 different interviews, not different rounds, but different interviews over the course of about 4 rounds of interviews. One of which included Larry Arnn, which I think was on the schedule for 30 minutes, and it ended up being more like an hour and 15. And the start of that interview, I'm barely even seated, and he sort of glances up. His eye line comes above his computer, and he hits me with, "What's your definition of politics?" Now, I probably should have known that I was supposed to prep for that kind of question. But unfortunately, my prep deck didn't include that one. So I kind of stumbled my way through an answer. And his after he listened politely for me to come around, he goes, "Well, that's wrong, but let's talk about why it's wrong."
That's fun.
But at one point, I asked him. Sorry, I'll cut my illustration to the point here. I asked him at one point. Sure. I was like, can I? Now it's my turn to ask a question. Maybe, what are you? What are we doing here? What is Hillsdale doing in Connecticut? What's the idea? Yeah. And he sits with that for a second and goes, "Funny thing, I was going to ask you that question." And I said, "Well, respectfully, I asked first." And in typical Larry Arnn fashion, he goes, "Well, I'm the president, so you're going to answer first." So I said to him, I was like, "I think, to borrow perhaps an overused scriptural illustration, I think one of our goals in New England is to spoil the Egyptians." And the idea there is that the wealth of some of the Ivy League, the tradition and history that they've inherited, and in many cases just the endowments that they've inherited, and the kinds of people that have put their legacy in the hands of those institutions, has been misplaced, unfortunately. That they are no longer striving to produce some of the best pastors that the world has ever seen, like their founding documents indicate they should. And in fact, if it happens, it's in spite of what they're doing, not because of it. And I think Hillsdale stands at a good place to fulfill that calling on this area of the country. And so I do think in that sense, we stand at a good place to not only do admissions and fundraising, but also programs right in the backyard of many of these schools, and in some sense, spoil the Egyptians. Larry Arnn likes to think of it as, Hillsdale's in a war for education. And the Blake Center is an important beachhead on the Eastern Front. And I like that analogy, too. Both of them actually warfare analogies of a sort.
Well, you're probably perfectly placed to be just right in the center of Dartmouth, Yale, and Harvard. I mean, you're right there. Equal, drive time, to each location, about an hour. Fascinating stuff. You have something you want to say there, Tom?
Yeah, real quick. I know a timely place. Again, I was asked one term. I was teaching ethics at the Boston campus at Gordon Conwell, and one of my students was also a graduate of Harvard in the sciences and was part of their. They have a group. I can't think of the name, but it's a very large group in the hard sciences, medicine and research sciences. That they host Christian speakers and moral philosophers and the like regularly to offer what actually Harvard isn't offering, is a theological and a deeper moral angle on the ethical issues and the larger, the larger questions related to science and knowledge. And I was asked to speak at one of these on the significance of Christian understanding of transcendence for actual ethical practice in medicine. And one of the fascinating conversations that came up after, and this is after a group of people pretty much from we even had Mennonite students there. We had students from Islamic backgrounds, Sikh, atheists, the whole group. It was packed, even though they were having other conferences on, like marching and protesting and things like that. But one of the questions that came up at the end is, we can't go to the divinity school here at Harvard because they don't ask and answer these questions. No. We need you. We need people like you to come in here and address these. And so you're seeing in the place where God had basically been thrown out in earlier generations, 19th century on, now they have a huge need for that conversation to come back in, where the divinity school that used to kind of carry the torch for that has basically ended up where the hard sciences are. So I think having a center that can address that will draw a lot of that missing element.
Yeah. I've got a story I like to tell about conversation I had with Harvey Cox when I was there. He tried to get Mark Knoll on the divinity school faculty at Harvard, and it was voted down. I mean, and it was voted down because it would make the divinity school too diverse. that was Harvey's way of putting it. He was joking, of course. He had a twinkle in his eye, but he was actually pretty disgusted. He had gone to all that work to try to. Noel had come out and done some lecturing and stuff like that, but they just didn't want anybody who had the moniker evangelical on their faculty. Anyway, long way away from where it started. So when it comes to the coming year, you've already noted a few courses that are coming up or programs. Is there anything that you really would like maybe people in the Pugcast world to know about? Because we're in 60 countries. It blows our minds, and so maybe we can crash your server.
Yeah, that's right.
Is there an online thing that some of our folks could participate in?
So my intention is to record a number of the things that we're going to offer in hopes that we can actually push these things out a little bit more broadly. I am, admittedly a child of my age. So I do think there's something to being able to record and consume content digitally. So when we have people out, for example, like when Michael Ward comes out, it's going to be C.S. Lewis on Christianity, but we're going to record that and make that available as sort of a Q&A session that will ride, on the back end of the fuller, Hillsdale free online course. We'll as much and as often as we can, we'll be recording. Obviously some speakers are a little bit more apprehensive about such things than others, so we'll have to be mindful of that part of it. And then some of our programs are, paid entry. So I am wanting to encourage people to come physically as well. So I think there's value on both ends of that spectrum. But we will for sure have some good content to be able to consume, regardless of whether or not you can come live and in person. There is, you mentioned Edwards. We are going to do a full-length retreat of Edwards in this area. Again, we'll have Jerry McDermott in for that. We'll have a couple of other Edwards scholars as well. And we're going to be going, to the sites, locally in New England. I mean, some of them just, right up the road. Northampton is just but a short drive from our front door. Yeah. And so I like to think of it like a land cruise focused on Edwards.
But maybe you could do it during like the the Halloween season when it's really creepy up there.
That's right.
Well, it can be kind of creepy in Northampton anyway.
I mean, here you're talking to a budding Anglican who appreciates the All Hallows Eve, approach.
Right. Yeah, but we can redeem Halloween. Maybe save it from those
All
Wiccans
Saints Day.
up there.
That's right.
That's right. Right.
Well, you also have down here. I mean, I'm sure they all know it, but it's where Glenn Sunshine's actually preaching Sunday is Wethersfield, which was the actual where Edwards. When Yale moved for a short period of time, actually it held its courses there in Wethersfield, at least the Divinity School, and Edwards took up residence there. So that's kind of, this whole area is kind of steeped in a drivable tour while the lecture happens.
Now, how about accommodations? I mean, let's say a person learns about this course with Michael Ward, and they want to come out. Summers isn't known for like its big hotel scene or anything.
Fair enough. Well, luckily, the hotel scene in Enfield is a bit better. So we've got decent hotels 5 minutes away. We've got good hotels 7 minutes away. And we have fantastic hotels 15 minutes away. So we kind of tell people you can pick your own adventure on that front. If you like a nicer hotel or a higher end bed and breakfast, you'll be more than 15 minutes away. If you're okay with a Hampton Inn, and it's very serviceable, we even put donors up in this Hampton Inn on occasion. 5 minutes away, and it's two turns.
Yeah.
You couldn't make it.
And there is the Bates Motel. I remember that's not too far. You remember Psycho?
I was hoping you wouldn't go there, but fair enough.
That was an option.
My wife was telling me the other day, I didn't even realize this, but Connecticut is, Chris Wiley, the big he had this running series. I think it was on Nightline or something like that. But it was basically catching, sex offenders that were trying to abuse young children. All of that Chris Wiley stuff, Chris Hansen stuff. Sorry, not Chris Wiley.
Yeah,
Chris
sorry.
I didn't know Chris had another gig going.
All that Chris Hansen stuff, all of that, gotcha. This guy comes in to meet with this young girl. All of that stuff that was based in Connecticut, and I don't know why. This whole time I was like, oh no.
It's Connecticut has its dark underside.
That's for sure. Sure.
So there are places for people to stay and be able to participate in the different programs. So as you think about though, so we've been focusing a lot on, say, the faith dimension. What are some of the things you guys are doing that kind of do the you talked a little bit about the separation of church and state, program you're going to do. Is there anything else that maybe touches on maybe the intersection?
And so one of our programs coming up, it's February 17th through 18th. We're having Martin Kulldorff and Jay Bhattacharya, two very prominent epidemiologists, COVID scientists. These are two guys who are mentioned by name in the Twitter Files releases as being censored by Twitter. And of course, now we're starting to learn that they were not just shadow banned by Twitter, but several other prominent social media platforms. They're coming out to talk through what it was like, not only being, censored by the media, but how they were able to continue to promote truth in their work despite that. And they were I would argue, very successful with the Great Barrington Declaration. They were able to continue despite being blacklisted, despite, the concerted efforts of high-ranking, executives inside these social media companies. They were still able to promote the truth in that environment. I think that's more than the push to reduce that censorship, which I think is its own sort of good outcome from those kinds of exposures. I think it's also good to note that there's still good work that we can do even if we're being censored. And these guys are living proof that that's the case. So they're going to come out and talk about COVID, public health policy, and being censored. And I see that as a part of the freedom component that, like I said before, is it directly a program on theology? Maybe not right in the title, but it's right there. It's right there for the taking because, if we lose our ability to speak freely, religious liberty is not far away.
Yeah,
that's right.
Yeah, I know Scott Yenner. I don't know if that name rings a bell, but Scott teaches at Boise State, and he's survived 2 cancellation attempts since he's been there. He wrote about his experience with the most recent one, and it was published in First Things. And I think it'd be wonderful to consider maybe how to survive cancellation attempt in various professions. Let's say you're a minister and your own congregation turns on you, or obviously higher education.
Well, I had it happen in especially with the vaccine issues within the university. I mean, they basically marched you right off campus.
But in this particular case, here's a couple of men, and if I remember correctly, they're connected. In other words, these aren't guys that are sort of out in the middle of nowhere blogging about things they don't know about. These are guys who were like,
Martin is a Harvard professor. Jay Bhattacharya, Stanford. These are not sort of kind of scientists. These are very serious scientists who are recognized as experts in their field. No question about it.
And still, they run afoul of the official narrative, and they can't get their message out. I'd like to know whether they even felt some internal pressure in their own institutions to shut it down. And you used to be able to say, well, I'm tenured, but sometimes that doesn't work anymore. I mean, our friend Tony Esselin, he was tenured at Providence College, and now he's no longer there. I mean, they can make your life so miserable that you're just like no longer even able to function in some of these places.
Well, and they certainly have taken it on the chin. And of course, not to give too many plugs here, but no better place to hear more about it than to come to the event.
Right.
But we do intend to live stream that as well. So following up from this, I'd be happy to share that with you. So that way, if anybody, who regularly watches the program or follows you on one of the other social media platforms, if they'd like to be able to view it and can't come in person, we'd love to make that available more broadly. These two guys, by the way, are a part of the Academy for Science and Freedom, which is, one of Hillsdale's newest ventures.
Oh, really?
Okay.
I wasn't aware of that. Can you expand on that a little bit?
Yeah. So the Academy for Science and Freedom was initially started sort of in the middle of COVID. Part of the reason it happened was Hillsdale took a very different approach to the handling of COVID. The science-based approach, we'd like to think, where the administration actually contacted several prominent epidemiologists and took their input and tried to balance that against, public health policy more broadly, but really kind of looking at, the factors of, who's this disease really affecting? And is it affecting the population of our students? And the decision was made pretty early on at Hillsdale that, we know enough about COVID to know that this is not a disease that is killing the young. This is not something that's impacting college-age students. And it is good for our students to be in school. And this partnership that we have, college is a partnership. This partnership that we have requires, the school to continue to function, and that we do not take from our students that which they so desperately want, which is, they want what is true and good and beautiful, and we are here to give it to them and give it to them in person. So with almost virtually no exception, I think I heard once that the faculty, all but one faculty member went back into person, and that person had a number of, potentially comorbidities that actually did sort of necessitate them to be remote for their course, but all in unison, you could say the faculty were supportive of this. So Hillsdale was back in operation, back live and in person, while, for, over a year, while other colleges and universities across the nation had decided to shut down, really kind of ignoring the science in favor of what is, convenient or popular or status quo. And so that kind of prompted this idea of, okay, if that's true on a policy procedure, there should be a think tank, there should be a place where these ideas are really discussed more broadly. Larry On had a very good relationship with Scott Atlas and Jay Bhattacharya and Martin Koldorf. And so those three are the sort of founding members of the Academy for Science and Freedom, which is really geared not just to look at COVID, though obviously that one's close at hand, especially now as I hear from the administration that the COVID emergency powers have now been given an end date. I think it behooves us to look back a little bit and consider carefully what we learned as the result of perhaps a very poorly handled instance of public health policy.
That whole event as it unfolded, it's just remarkable how those who were maybe in the early phases lionized and almost idolized Anthony Fauci, for example, now look very different in the rearview mirror, and it does raise, I think, important questions to consider with regard to, the work of a pastor in a local church, when you have that kind of betrayal of your trust, in the sense that, I know of instances where churches have actually permanently been closed, because the way the whole thing unfolded meant that, say, for example, a church that was in the early phases of being planted and getting started shuts down. There's all the momentum that it had developed is gone, and there's no prospect for it to get started again. There were costs that I still don't think are being accounted for. Businesses that went out of business.
It has still impacted, higher education. I know that the places that I am teaching in person again are only having a small percentage of people return in large cases. They are doing hybrid courses, which are the technology is great, but it is still very difficult as a teacher to be managing the students sitting in front of you, and also trying to pay attention to the different squares that keep popping up
Right.
on the screen,
Right.
all the while trying to show both the class and these people your kind of notes or your outlines. And it makes, I mean, learning already can be difficult just to keep up with, pretty dense content. But you couple that with small volumes of people showing up to classrooms. They want to, but they have that option. A lot of them still like to sit in their living room while they do the class. And it really does distract. And so, I mean, again, this is one of the side effects that continues to linger that I think again, bad policy early. I mean, bad decision making, not following the science early on has created something that's not going to be easy to dig out of.
So as we kind of bring, the show to a close here, Labin, a couple of thoughts I wanted to to explore just briefly. One is, how is the sort of the progress coming along in terms of connecting with institutions in Connecticut, churches, so forth?
So we've admittedly it's challenging. I think in general, New England is they're uncomfortable with change as a general thing, which I think a lot of people are. But New England, perhaps a bit more so. And then, I guess being a Texan by birth, I can say that they have a very strong sense of yank from around here. I've faced the yank from around here face quite a bit, but that's not to say that there's not moments of common cause. So, what we're doing perhaps from the outside, there are places that are working from the inside. So the Rivendell Institute at Yale, there's the Massachusetts Family Institute, which is connected to focus on the family. There's lots of common cause moments, and I intend to make as much common cause as I can, because I certainly don't think there's anything advantageous to operating on an island. Certainly not in this area of the country. So there are sort of encouraging movements on that front. We've got a preaching camp coming up where we are going to be bringing in local pastors from the area, helping them sharpen their homiletical swords. And bringing in one of my profs, Timothy Warren from DTS, who's got his PhD in communications and has been teaching preaching to some of the best for decades now. And they'll be able to come in and actually give a sermon live in front of their fellow classmates and receive on the spot feedback. That kind of thing. Maybe you do get on the spot feedback in your church. Then maybe you have to take that with a grain of salt, right?
Right. Yeah. So that's a good segue to this last question, and that is, so with our audience, what would you like to see from us? I mean, what you're doing is great. The programs that you described are just right, sort of in our center of interest. Are there ways that people can learn more, can support the effort, give to the center, that kind of thing?
I guess I can take that as sort of a two-parter. I think there's something, and I gave a talk on this recently. There's something important that I think is easily forgotten in a world that is constantly draining us, of an attention span, and that is the concept that we were, as human beings, made to know what is true. And because we were made to know what is true, that means that we have the capacity to know what is true. And to take a corollary a step further than that, we're not only made to know what is true, we were made to be able to share what is true. And it's those two things together that I think give me hope, not only for the center, but for this area of the country and indeed the world, that if human beings have the capacity to know what is true and share what is true, then there is hope for the world. So there's that encouraging side of it, but then, that comes with a sort of responsibility. If you're made to know what is true, then you have to seek out what is true and know it and then share it. And the center is a great place to not only increase in your knowledge of truth, but also meet with like-minded people and receive some accountability for sharing that in the balance. You're going to have the chance to rub shoulders with people that share with you a lot of the same opinions and background. That can be an encouragement on its own, but also responsibility. If they're going back their places of living and doing business to share what they've learned, then you too are sort of required to do the same. Truth comes with that implication that we have to share it. I think is a sort of a quick and easy call to action. If you go to our website and simply put in your name and your email address, then we can keep you up to date on what we're going to be doing, keep you up to date on events. And then, of course, if you ever want to make a visit or know anything more, it's, I'm no more than an email away at that point.
Excellent. Excellent. Well, we'll definitely have that website in our show notes. And also we'll, have the larger Hillsdale campus in Michigan, that website as well. And anything else you want us to include. But it's been great to have you, Labin. Thanks for
thank you.
My pleasure.
Time.
Yeah, I know you got things.
It's been my pleasure.
Yeah, and I know you have things you have to get to, and anyway, we want to say thank you as well to the listeners. Thank you for another period of time that you've spent with us. Got to the end of another show. If this is your first time with us, we congratulate you to getting to the end. and
there are plenty of previous episodes you can start.
Yeah, that's actually one of the things that fascinates me. When people learn about the Pugcast, they go all the way back and listen from the start. I've had
there have been a few who have listened to every episode.
Yeah, it's remarkable.
Yeah.
If you're one of those folks, thank you for that. If you'd like to support the Pugcast, we do have a Patreon account. You can also support us through the Fight, Laugh, Feast Network. Anyway, enough for now. Thanks again, and we'll be with you again another time. And bye-bye.
Bye.
The Theology Pugcast is a ministry of Trinity Reformed Church in Huntsville, Alabama. If you enjoy the Theology Pugcast, you might enjoy one of our other podcasts, Got a Minute, featuring Larson Hicks and Pastor Rich Lusk. Rich theological discussion, guaranteed to leave you edified.